How do you handle the pressures of life? How do you handle the pressures of life? I understand that the struggle of worry and anxiety, the pressure that we feel is all felt differently. And the way that we manifest those emotions and those feelings are done differently, because some of us, stress and anxiety is internalized. Some of us, it just eats away at our mind and it eats away at our heart. Some of us, it has outward presence in our life. I have learned in my life that when I'm under pressure, I tend, I'm going to say, rise to the challenge. But let me preface that when I say rise to the challenge, it's normally not a healthy rise to the challenge. Normally, whenever I'm under the pressure, I ensure that my work gets done at whatever cost. I ensure that everything is taken care of, regardless of what it costs me. And when I say that I will lose sleep at those times. I've told you before, whenever I took Greek class, I'm horrible in foreign languages and Greek was the worst. But when I took Greek, I stayed up till 4 a.m. My average bedtime was 4 a.m. And I slept on the door so that my roommates would hit me with the door when they were leaving for school, like leaving for their class. Because I knew that under no circumstance would I wake up on my own. When I'm under pressure, I will do about anything to accomplish what's set before me. But I also know that when I lose sleep, my body craves sugar. And when I crave sugar, you know what I tend to do? Well, I go for a donut or a chocolate bar or something that I know I should not have, something that is not healthy for me. And so for me, when the pressures of life build up, I tend to not take care of myself. How do you manifest pressure in your life? What do you do whenever you realize that you are stressed and you are concerned and you are worried and you just don't know how to handle it? Do you turn to distractions to find your way out? Do you turn to something else? What do you turn to that takes your focus away from what is worrying you and puts it onto something else? We often think of faith in times like this as that should be the rock solid foundation that we stand on. We look to faith and we say, well, I should have more faith in moments of my personal weakness. That I should, in some way, I should be able to stand on the message of Jesus Christ and that He should solve all of my problems. But that doesn't always happen, does it? Sometimes we then begin to question our faith, and that causes more worry because we say, why don't I have the faith to handle this situation? Today's story comes from Daniel chapter 6. And as we look at Daniel chapter 6 together, what I want us to do is I want us to look at Darius. Normally, sermons in Daniel 6 focus on Daniel, and he's the worthy person to focus on, don't get me wrong. But I've preached a sermon on Daniel, and I've preached a sermon on Daniel's attention in chapter 6 before. You've heard it. And so I figured in this lesson, I want to look at a different character, someone who we don't often pay attention to, and that is King Darius. He's the one who I think shows remarkable faith in the middle of a unique story. So, Daniel chapter 6, if you have your Bibles, feel free to open there. We'll read some of the verses here in a moment, but I want to give you just a recap of the story so that you're somewhat aware of what's going on in the story of Daniel chapter 6. We start off, we are introduced to King Darius. Now, King Darius is really the first Medo-Persian emperor to rule. He is the one who is responsible directly for conquering Babylon. He's the one who's moved in, and he is setting up his royal court. He is setting up his cabinet. He is determining who's going to be his advisors, and he is determining how the government's going to operate for his benefit and for the benefit of the nation. That's where we're at, Daniel chapter 1, verse 6. And he determines that the government is so large that they need 120 people to be over every one of the divisions, and that over those 120 people, he needs 3. So he wants to wake up every day and he wants 3 people in his room. He wants to talk to them, and then he says, look, y'all take care of everybody else. That's kind of the waterfall effect that he is creating. But we're told very quickly that Daniel is a man who shows himself very promising. Have we seen that before in Daniel? Thank you, Lyle. Lyle's the only person. Have we seen that before in Daniel? We've seen it before. Daniel has consistently shown himself to be a moral person, a person of character, a person who has the ability to organize and operate big business. Like, he is good for this job. And so Darius is acknowledging. And so Darius's plan at this point is he's like, I'm going to put Daniel right under me. Like, I'm going to wake up in the morning. Daniel's going to be the only guy I talk to. And Daniel's going to take care of everything else. That's kind of what Darius is planning. Well, these satraps, the 120 or so, they don't like that. That means power is being taken away from them. That means that they aren't the ones rising up and being direct influential to the king. And so they create a plan. They're like, we got to find something wrong with Daniel. He's secret. He's got something inside of him that's wrong. And they search and they can't find it. And so if they make this conclusion, they say, you know what? Daniel is such a moral individual. He's such a godly individual. Oh, just disgusting. That the only thing we could do would be to find a fault with him in his faithfulness to his God. So they create this idea. They say, look, we're going to get King Darius to write a law that says for the next 30 days, a person has to pray only to King Darius. After 30 days, you pray who you want to. We don't really care. But for 30 days, you have to pray only to King Darius. If you're found praying to anybody else, it's the death penalty right away. So Darius agrees, not realizing that this is a trap. I don't know what it was like for Daniel that first day when the law is signed and he goes home. And it says that he goes home, he goes to the upper room of his home, he opens the window, he faces Jerusalem, and he prays. And I speculate, at least on Daniel, what could have happened if he had said, I'm just not going to open the shades today. I'm facing Jerusalem. I'm doing everything that I can, but today I'm going to leave the window shut because I know that what I'm about to do is illegal. He doesn't do that. He opens his windows. He embraces the faith that he's always had. Well, the satraps, they catch him. Ha! We caught you. He's kind of like, I don't know if they like jump out from behind a bush. I don't know how that works. I don't know what they're doing, or if they're just like, ha, we caught you. That's ultimately what happens. And so they like drag Daniel before the king, and they're like, look, king, he broke the law. You made it. He should die. And Darius, we're introduced to this moment where Darius is sad. Like, he is distraught over this. He's deeply upset because Daniel was his friend. As much as a person in the king position can be, he trusted Daniel. Daniel was the person who he could have told anything to, and Daniel would have been honest and genuine to take care of it. So, end of the story. We'll jump through some verses here, but the end of the story is that Daniel gets thrown in the lion's den. He wakes up the next day in the lion's den, and Darius is there, and he's like, Daniel's still alive. And so they pull Daniel out and they throw the bad guys in. End of the story. It all ends well. So now that you have the story of Daniel chapter 6 on abbreviated portion, here are the questions that I ponder over when I looked over this chapter myself. Because the first thing I noticed is that Babylon is a place of many gods. It's a place where you have multiple religions working, and many people followed many different religions. But what I noticed, the first thing about King Darius is, even though he would be called, we call him polytheistic, meaning he has a whole bunch of gods. We believe that Darius is that guy, but he acknowledges the power of Daniel's God. That's the first thing I noticed. And this is coming in verse 16, Daniel chapter 6, verse 16. He acknowledges the power of Daniel's God. Let's read that real quickly. So the king gave the order. They brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. But this is Darius's comment before they throw him into the lion's den. The king says to Daniel, "May your God whom you serve continually rescue you." It's not, this is an acknowledgement of Daniel's faithfulness, that Daniel has consistently been faithful. And notice that King Darius even acknowledges that Daniel is a man who's constantly in prayer. He is constantly in the service of his God, which are things that we're told to do as well. But Darius believes that Daniel's God is capable of saving him. Darius doesn't stand back and say, "I'm so sorry, Daniel, that you're going to die. I'm so sorry you're not going to make it. I'm so sorry that this is what it has to be." Darius doesn't argue from that position. In a way, he prays as much as a non-believer can pray that God would save him. And I look at this passage and realize that Darius has a basic hope in our God. Sometimes those who are unfamiliar with God can see the power of God. It's those people who may not even acknowledge Him as their God, who have the most remarkable faith. Darius here, the man who does not truly believe in God, in Daniel's God who's called Yahweh, he doesn't believe in Him in the same way. But yet he acknowledges that Daniel's God can save. Are we, those who know God, praying with the same confidence that Darius prays with? Do we believe that our God is capable to save regardless of the situations? Many people are hesitant to turn to God in their moments of uncertainty because we feel we have to have things figured out. We have to know that that's part of God's will. We're told to pray in the will of God. So we have to say, well, God, I'm going to ask for this, but only if it's within your will. Darius never took the moment to ask if it was in God's will that Daniel be saved. In his uncertainty and in his inability, in his ignorance, he just prayed, "May your God save you." What if, even in my doubt, I still took steps of faith? What about times even when I struggle? What if I turned to God in the midst of my uncertainty instead of waiting for things to be perfect? Instead of waiting for me to have the greatest understanding and to know that God's going to have it under control? How many fear coming to God unprepared or not ready when God has never asked us to clean ourselves up? God has never once said, "Make your life right before you come to me." God has taken the person, each one of us, wherever we were in our beginning, and has traveled with us through this journey of life in the midst of our weaknesses, in the midst of our failures, and He has walked with us each through our journey. I notice this in Darius, but I notice this in us, that maybe we want to be perfect before we go to God. Maybe we want to have the right faith before we go to God. And God never once asked us to be right. He asked us to go to Him. The second thing I notice in Darius, in his life and in this moment, is that he turns off all the distractions. Let's look now at verse 18. So we're coming to verse 18. We skip verse 17. There's not a lot there. You can read it yourself. But verse 18 makes this comment. "Then the king returned to his palace, and he spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought into him, and he could not sleep." I read that passage, and it struck me. Did Darius know that he was praying and fasting when he did that? Did he have the wherewithal to acknowledge that I'm going to go and I'm going to pray and fast and I'm going to put sackcloth and ashes on? He didn't. There was not an ounce within him that said, "Oh, I'm going to do this to Daniel's God." Or at least if there is, we're not told it. But what we are told is that he is in such concern, such worry, such stress, that he goes to his home and he says, I don't want to turn the TV on. Don't bring anything in that's going to help make me happy, because right now I don't want to be happy. And oh, by the way, he could have a feast brought before him of anything and everything, the most beautiful foods you could ever imagine. I mean, y'all know places with like a really good salad bar? I mean, can you imagine being like, I'm going to snap my fingers and like people just start ushering food in and it's like the top-notch salad bar. I'm just trying to picture this, and he doesn't want it. Oh, I'm picturing like a chocolate fluff, dessert on the end of the bar, maybe a nice salad. Fat Jimmy's Pizza has a really nice salad bar. It's a side note. You could try Fat Jimmy's. That's Rick Collier's favorite place, but did he have the moment where he said, I'm going to fast and pray? And the answer was no. In the midst of his worry, in the midst of his anxiety, in the midst of the pressure of his life, of the loss of a friend, and the reality that Daniel is dying or is about to die, that's what's in his mind, he says, I can't eat. The only thing that can be on my mind is Daniel. And I realize that there are times in my life when I can't eat. I'm too worried. I'm too stressed. I'm too concerned where the feelings inside of me are too much and I can't eat because every bite just doesn't taste good because there's too much worry in my life. I do wonder if Darius at any point in this night, laying on his bed, said, Daniel's God? I don't know you, but my friend Daniel does. I wonder if there was a moment where he said that. We don't know. We're not told. But I do wonder if there was a time where he looked to the stars up above and said, Yahweh, if you're real, protect Daniel. How often is it that we, in the midst of our stress and anxiety, will look for something to make us feel better instead of embracing the agony of the discomfort? You see, what I notice is that whenever I am stressed, I turn to food. That's a natural thing for me to turn to. But I wonder about you. Some of you turn to food too. You just may not realize it yet. Some of you turn to food and you realize it. It's like the bag of chips always calls my name when I'm stressed, But some of you turn to other things when you're stressed. For some people, it's alcohol. It's a very easy one to look at because we say, well, when I'm stressed, I turn to alcohol because I can help numb some of this feeling. And that's the beginning pathway to an alcoholic when we say, well, I'm just gonna do it to soften the edge of my life. There's too much pressure. I'm gonna turn to weed because it's gonna help me go to sleep tonight. It's gonna help soften the edge of my life. I'm gonna turn to whatever substance so that I can just get through today. We've even modernized this into modern medicine, not to criticize some modern medicines, but some has been the medication to solve a problem that's emotional, that's spiritual, where we need a God to solve the problem. Maybe some of you, it's not even a substance. Maybe it's the screen that you like to hold in your hand. Oh man. You know how long I can spend on Facebook? And I don't even go on Facebook to read y'all's posts. Most of y'all, I don't even pay attention. I watch the short videos, the reels. And if it's not a 30-second video, I scroll through it. But what I know too is that if I don't have a 30-minute timer on Facebook, I'll sit there for hours. The same with TikTok or any of those things. How often do we turn to the screens in our life? How often do we binge watch The Office? Or do we binge watch MSNBC, CBS, Fox News? That we binge watch whatever this is on a screen so that we can somehow escape from our reality, from the life that we are living. We use this and we call it, I just need to decompress. That's the famous man line whenever we come home from a long day of work, is it's like, I just need to decompress. I need to be alone for a moment. I need to escape this for a moment. And we turn on and we binge watch our show. We do anything and everything to escape our present reality. But Darius embraced the pain. He didn't turn on the TV that night. He could have called for anything to have happened. You want pole dancers? They're going to show up. You want a buffet of food? It's going to show up. You want some sort of magical smoke that's going to make you feel better? It's going to show up. Darius could call for anything. And he chose to embrace his anxiety, his worry, his concern, and he chose to take it to God in some version of a prayer. How often do we try to numb those things? There's this story of Elijah in 1 Kings 19, where Elijah is concerned for his life. And so it says that but this is the text after Elijah has destroyed the prophets of Baal. He's run to Horeb, he's hungry, God feeds him. And in this moment, he is asking for the presence of God. He's really wanting to die. And God says to Elijah, go out on the cliff and I want to show you something. And we see these things happen. There's a great wind. The rocks are like falling apart. Like, I don't even know. It's some sort of like tornado a moment. After the tornado is some sort of a severe earthquake. Like the thing is shaking. And then after the earthquake is some massive fire. And then is the whisper. And God in all those moments says, I wasn't in any of the great and powerful things. I was in the whisper. I think oftentimes we look for God in the great and powerful moments and we fail to realize that God is in the silence of our life. When you turn your TV off, when you embrace the moment of whatever your life is, the struggle, the pain, the pressure that you're in, when you grasp on to those things and you say, I'm going to sit in silence for this moment and I want God to speak, that's where God's at. We often try to drown Him out by turning stuff on, by getting something going so that we don't have to focus on our pain. But Darius teaches us to focus on our pain for a moment. And so Darius' night was spent in silence, reminding us of that. The third thing I see in Darius is a faith that has expectation. Verse 19, this was to me the most interesting thought. Darius is king. He knows Daniel's thrown in the lion's den. And by the way, these lions are hungry. It's not like they're well-fed, and it's not like they're the tame ones that you have at the zoo. And if you want to ask Anna, even the zoo animals, you don't really interact with them. So you're protected from them unless they tranquilize them. So you don't really hang out with the lions. And they're going to be hungry. So when you throw Daniel in, what's supposed to happen to Daniel? He's supposed to be a pile of bones. Matter of fact, there are probably some broken bones along this journey. But notice what Darius does. Let's look at verse 19. Darius wakes up the next morning, and at first light of dawn, the king got up and he hurried to where? Why do you run to the lion's den if Daniel's supposed to be dead? If Daniel's supposed to be, if your best friend's supposed to be a goner, why are you going to get up and run there? And catch this, in the next verse, he even hollers out and he says, Daniel, speak to me. And Daniel says, hey, I'm here. God's angel protected me all night long. I've sat here among the lions, and I don't know if they like curled up next to him. I don't know if they kept him warm. I really don't know. Like maybe God had like a little angel force field around. I don't know how that worked. We'll leave that to God. You ask him when you get there. But I do know this. Darius ran to the place where Daniel's supposed to be dead. And in some sense of faith, in whatever you call the faith that Darius has, he runs to this tomb with expectation that Daniel's alive because he hollers out for him. And Daniel replies, his hope is in a way greater than mine. How often have I prayed to God for something? and then been like, well, maybe it will happen. How often have I asked God for the impossible things to occur, and then the next day I'd be like, well, it's not going to happen, or I'm not expecting God to follow through with what I've asked. Darius had no need to go to the den. He could have stayed in his chambers. Word would have eventually gotten back to him that Daniel was okay, but he had this expectation that Daniel was going to be okay, and so he runs to him. How often do I run with expectation to what God, or to what my prayers have been to God? Are we open that God may actually answer what we ask of Him? Or do we stay in our copped out position that, well, it must not be the will of God? He wouldn't answer it because I'm asking selfishly. I'm asking what I want. This week, when you face worries and anxieties, I want you to set aside the distractions of God, or set aside the distractions from God and focus on Him. You see, Darius's willingness to seek God, I believe, is an encouragement to us. It's an encouragement for us to seek God. So if I were to give you a concluding line, something that you should take home with you today, I want you to have a call to quiet faith in the midst of a distracted world. I want to give you a call for a quiet faith in a distracted world. First off, I know that pondering faith is difficult for some of us because we want it to be grand. We want it to be grandiose. We think when we ponder faith that it should be something big and theological, that maybe I don't know enough to think about faith, to ponder faith. But true faith isn't found in certainty, is it? True faith is found in life. And sometimes it's found when we don't know what to do, when we don't know how to answer, and we don't know what to be. Darius, in his life, doesn't really know what faith is. And yet he shows us that sometimes our uncertainty is where God meets us. When I don't know, He never asked me to be perfect. He never asked me to figure it out. God only said, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." The second thing I would challenge you with is to practice silence in this week. There's a really good chance that most of you have no silence in your life. That from the moment you get up in the morning to the moment you go to sleep at night, you are disturbed by constant noise. So my challenge for you is this: get you a timer, your phone counts, and set it for 2 minutes and sit in silence. And when you sit in this silence for 2 minutes a day, that's what I'm asking for, 2 minutes a day, you can do one of two things. The first thing is you can just simply breathe. Deliberate breath. In, out. If you want to add words to it, when you breathe in, say this: "Speak, Lord," and when you breathe out, "For your servant is listening." Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Do that for 2 minutes every day in silence. No music, no background stuff, nothing, just silence. And let that be your prayer. And if you're going to pray for God to speak, turn your ears on. Expect that He's going to speak to you. If you need a hearing aid, plug it in. Do whatever you got to do. But most of us are going to say, "God, I want you to answer this." And then we're not going to expect Him to answer it. We're not going to wait for Him to answer it. We're going to say, "Well, I guess He didn't care. I guess He didn't hear." And we're going to move on. Expect that God will answer your prayers. This morning, Braden has our application prayer. I'm going to invite Braden up at this time. If there's some way that we can walk with you through this journey of faith, and it is a journey, it's not something that happens quickly. It's a journey. Some of you are still on it. Many of you, actually all of you are still on it. But some of you are at different points. Some of you are starting your journey. If we can walk with you in that, I'll be down front. Come and find me. after Braden's prayer.
Sorry, y'all, I had to write something down because I would not remember it. Dear God, in the calmness of our hearts, we ask for your presence. Give us the faith to listen in silence, to trust in your guidance. In your name we pray. Amen.